If you want to be boys again without a care and keep gray hair away.
The owl is in his leafy temple. Let all within the grove be reverent before him. For behold, here is Bohemia's shrine, and holy are the pillars of this house. Hi, I'm Bill Domhoff. I teach psychology and sociology at the University of California in the beautiful seaside city of Santa Cruz. What you're seeing is the Mighty Owl Shrine at a place called the Bohemian Grove, an encampment for the very rich, a playground for the powerful. And what you've just heard are the opening lines that are spoken by the high priest in an initiation ceremony that has started every encampment since 1880. What you're going to see in the rest of this video is the story of the power elite at its Bohemian Grove. I'm going to tell you something about the living quarters, the entertainment, the pranks, the nonsense, the political talks, and details on that opening ceremony. I'm also going to tell you something about the guests at the Bohemian Grove, including former presidents like Richard Nixon or George Bush or Ronald Reagan. Well, I am a professor, so I'll also be telling you something about the sociological significance of the Bohemian Grove, about its functions, about what its existence indicates. But in telling you about the significance of this Bohemian Grove, I don't want to give you the impression that it's at the very heart of the American power elite. So towards the end of my comments, I'll be giving you that larger picture. The Bohemian Grove is only an instance, only one piece of what we call the power structure. Put another way, I'm going to use the story of the Bohemian Grove as a window into the power structure in the United States. The Bohemian Grove is owned and operated by a downtown men's club in San Francisco called, appropriately enough, the Bohemian Club. That club was founded way back in 1872 by a group of young journalists, writers, and business people who wanted to get together a couple times each week to read poetry, read plays, and of course to have a lot of drinks. What you see behind me right now is the current clubhouse for the Bohemian Club. It's a 4-story building covered with ivy. If we go a little further into the clubhouse, we come to the bar room. The bar room at the Bohemian Club is called the Cartoon Room because the walls are decorated with large cartoon-like figures that were drawn by famous artists who visited the club down through the years. Now we see the Cartoon Room with some very dignified-looking gentlemen standing inside it. And if we look right in the center of the picture, we see what's a window. It looks very white. If you look closely at that window, what you'll see is the emblem of an owl. So it's not just out in the Bohemian Grove that we find owls. Owls are in fact everywhere for Bohemians because, lo and behold, owls are the totem animal of the Bohemian Club. We find them on the stationery, we find them on ashtrays, we find them on little pins that the men wear on their lapel. Well, if calling the owl the totem animal of the Bohemian Grove sounds a little anthropological and tribal and prehistoric, it's meant to. Because in fact, these men's clubs in America have much the same function as do male secret societies in pre-literate societies. And one of those functions is excluding women, making sure that women are kept out of power and increasing male solidarity. So, women are not allowed to be members of the Bohemian Club, and they're not allowed to be guests at the Bohemian Grove. And if you can believe this, they're not even allowed to come in the front door of the downtown clubhouse on the rare occasions when they're allowed to be guests. Well, I'll be coming back to talk more about the sociological significance of the Bohemian Club in just a minute. But for now, let's go back out to the Bohemian Grove and see what's happening out there. The Bohemian Grove is located on the Russian River, 75 miles north of San Francisco. It covers 2,700 acres, but only a few hundred of those acres are actually used. The Bohemian Grove is actually divided into about 120 different camps. It's like you took the fraternity row at a big university and moved it up into the redwoods. Each of these camps has a little pet name like Aviary, or Sons of Toil, or Druids, or Mandalay, or Wolf. And each of these camps also has a special drink that it offers. It has special gags that it plays upon the visitors who come to see them. The men are constantly moving around from camp to camp, talking to each other. The mythology is that all of these camps are equal, but the truth is that some of these camps are a lot more equal than others. The really big wheels are at Mandalay, where there's a former president or two, as well as former cabinet officers and many heads of major corporations. There's also a former president named Ronald Reagan at Owl's Nest, and there's a former president at Hillbillies, a man named George Bush. Summer camp at the Bohemian Grove always takes place in the last 2 weeks in July when the weather is usually perfect. The encampment encompasses 3 weekends, and it's on the weekends that there's 1,500 to 2,000 men in the Grove. During the rest of the week, attendance can dip as low as 350 to 400. The encampment begins on a Friday night, but the big event of the first weekend is the Saturday night initiation ceremony featuring the high priest and the owl. So now I want you to kind of sit back and relax, get yourself in a mood to see how the Power Elite and their supporting cast do summer camp. I'm going to take you through that opening ceremony. It's called the cremation of care, with care meaning the burdens and responsibilities that important men supposedly must carry. It takes a cast of over 250 elders, priests, torchbearers, fire tenders, and woodland voices to conduct the ceremony. So I want you to picture yourself comfortably seated in a beautiful outdoor dining hall. It's early evening, you've finished a sumptuous dinner, and you are sitting quietly with your drink. Out of the shadows on the nearby hillside, you see a line of men dressed in orange-red robes, wearing tall pointed hats. Funeral music begins to play. You notice a few of the men are carrying an open coffin, and it contains a body. It's really an effigy, of course. It is Mr. Dullcare himself, who stands, as I said, for worries and concerns. And he's about to be sacrificed on a big bonfire. Well, as the funeral procession moves past the dining area, the rest of the men follow it down to the owl shrine by the lake and seat themselves to watch the cremation. First, a tree spirit comes out of a big redwood and sings about the beauty of the setting. And then the priest and his helpers come forward, and the priest speaks his flowery words for a few minutes. And then the body of Dullcare is put on the bonfire. The high priest criticizes Dullcare, calls him the archenemy of beauty. And he shouts, "Bring fire." But suddenly there's a great clap of thunder and a rush of wind. Peals of loud, ugly laughter come ringing down from a hill above the lake. A dead tree is illuminated in the middle of the hillside, and Care himself bellows forth with a thundering blast. He says, "Fools, fools, when will you learn that you cannot slay me?" And the high priest is very taken aback by this impressive outburst. And then Dullcare tells the high priest in no uncertain terms that priestly fires are not going to do him in. "I spit upon your fire," he roars. And with that, there's a great explosion, and all the torches are immediately extinguished. And the only remaining light comes from the lamp of fellowship at the base of the owl. So the priest turns to the owl. He falls to his knees, and he lifts up his arms towards the shrine, and he asks, "O great symbol of mortal wisdom, Owl of Bohemia, grant us thy counsel." And the owl's head begins to glow, and the owl actually speaks. And he says that Dullcare is right. Fire can't kill Dullcare, at least not an ordinary fire. The only thing that can get rid of Dullcare is the fire from the lamp of fellowship, closeness. And of course the priest thinks, "Why didn't I think of that?" And he runs over to the lamp of fellowship, he relights the torch, and he torches the bonfire. And an orchestra starts to play very inspirational music. Dullcare starts to wail and scream because, of course, he's on his way out. And the chorus begins to sing, and there's fireworks that go off. And then out comes a big brass band, and they're playing "There'll Be a Hot Time in the Old Town Tonight." And the guys get up, and they begin to cheer and jump around. They whoop and they holler. They have been freed by their priest to enjoy their encampment. It's like they're back in college, and there's a big fraternity bonfire. What's going on here in this cremation of care ceremony? Well, it's about a lot more than just excluding women. It's about excluding everybody else. It's an invitation into an in-group. It's an initiation into a very exalted kind of status. The fact that the ceremony is so spectacular tells these men that they are very special in the world. The fact that it's been done the same way since 1929, when this statue was first built, tells them the world is timeless, that tradition has made it so their place in life is very, very secure. The cremation of care is only the beginning of the entertainment at the Bohemian Grove. There's going to be concerts, there's going to be other plays, there's going to be trap shooting, there's going to be swimming, there's going to be nature walks, and a whole lot more. The second most extravagant performance at the Grove is what's called the hijinks. It's a very eloquent kind of play that tells us about the timelessness of things, once again, and about tradition. There's also a play that's put on that's called the Low Jinks. It's a musical comedy. That play spoofs some aspect of society or spoofs the elite themselves. Sometimes those plays get to be a little bit raunchy. Since they exclude women from the Grove, men themselves have to play these parts as women. The men get quite a kick out of talking about who's going to play these various women's parts. And it's precisely in these parts, because they're kind of walk-on parts, that they're most likely to use the most prestigious men in the Bohemian Grove. Now, you might say to yourself, how do busy and important men of the kind I claim go to the Grove, how do they have time to practice for such a play? And the answer is that they don't. They aren't playing the major roles. This is one of the things that makes the Bohemian Club so unique. It has a whole set of people called associate members who are really performing members. These are artists and writers and singers and even a few professors. And they get into the club for reduced dues, and then they are the ones that play the major role in putting on this huge amount of entertainment at the Bohemian Grove. Now, this turns out to be a great deal for both the rich and the powerful and for these artistic members. On the one side, the artistic members get to be members of a club that's far more elegant and higher status than they could ever belong to on their own. You get to take their friends there and to enjoy things. But they also make contacts there. One person I interviewed said to me that he made many contacts for his band to play at weddings and other kinds of ceremonies for wealthy people. Some of the artists sell their work to the wealthy bohemians at the Bohemian Grove. On the other side of the equation, the rich bohemians have the possibility of saying, hey, I know a lot of artists. I'm hip to what's going on in the world today. Well, once again, we stop our story to ask, what's going on here? Now, if we ask the men, they'll say they're just out for a little R&R. But if we scratch the surface, we'll find them saying, hey, it's a great place to meet new people. It's a great place to renew acquaintances. Great place to bring your son to meet the gang. It's also a great place to bring a rising executive or indeed a political protege. In other words, what's developing here is social cohesion. These men are becoming tight with each other. And I think social cohesion matters a great deal, because otherwise they're just a collection of rich individuals. They don't have the ability to coordinate and have influence on government. Now, we're going to come back to that point a little later when we talk about the power structure as a whole. But here I just want to say to you that there is a lot of research that's been done on cohesion in small groups. And that research tells us that there are 4 key points in a group developing tight social cohesion. I want you to notice how well each of these points fits the Bohemian Grove. The first point is that if people are in close physical proximity, they develop social cohesion. And there's plenty of physical proximity at the Bohemian Grove. Secondly, the more people interact, the more they develop social cohesion. And that's all that these people are doing at the Bohemian Grove, is interacting, drinking and interacting, I should say. Thirdly, groups that are seen as very high in status are groups that develop tight social cohesion. And of course that fits the Bohemian Grove perfectly. You don't ask to join, they ask you. The whole thing is about excluding certain people, and other people get to go to this fancy retreat. Fourth, social cohesion develops best in an atmosphere of relaxation and cooperation. And once again, that fits the Bohemian Club to a T. So if we're going to draw a little sociological lesson here, we say social cohesion is developing at the Bohemian Grove. Well, so far we've got it. There's entertainment at the Grove, and there's social cohesion at the Grove. Is there anything else? After all, these people are businessmen. 25 to 35% of the people who are there are directors and managers of major corporations, and lots of the other people are in smaller businesses as well. So don't they talk business while they're there at the Bohemian Grove? Aren't they cutting deals? Well, yeah, sort of. But what we have to remember is they've had a lot to drink, and they couldn't remember the details of a deal if they had to. What's going on is something else. A very wealthy man who had read my book on the Bohemian Grove once said to me, you know, I was at that Bohemian Grove as a guest a couple years ago, and he said, I want you to know I didn't talk business once while I was up there. And he paused and he says to me, but I did make some great appointments for later that led to some wonderful deals. And then, of course, he had a big laugh. Now, probably isn't much business then going on up there, but they do write this trip off as a business expense. And I have one memo purloined from a wonderful student from a file where a corporate lawyer details for his firm all the people he's had as guests at the Grove in the last few years, and why he therefore should be able to continue to deduct 1/3 of his expenses when he goes to the Bohemian Grove from his taxes, or be paid back by the firm as a business expense. In other words, we don't call these people the corporate rich for nothing. These people live off the corporation as much as they live off of their own salaries. Well, if there's not much business going on up there, there is a lot of politicking going on. And that politicking takes place primarily around what are called the lakeside talks, where the speaker stands on a podium that looks with his back to the lake, looking out towards the men that are sitting on the bank. And each afternoon, there's one of these talks. During the week, the talk might be by an artist, it might be by a professor, it might be by a business person. The talks vary a great deal in their substance. One year, they had an astronaut speak, for example, and telling how it was to be way up there. But on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, the talks get heavier. They're more likely, much more likely, to be about politics. And they'll involve some of the most important people in the world giving the talk. The Prime Minister of Germany, Prime Minister of France, former President of Mexico in 1992 spoke on the importance of passing NAFTA. There's also presidents and former presidents and future presidents that have spoken at the Bohemian Grove. And the first example I want to give you involves General Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1950. And this example is told to us by Richard Nixon, who was to be Ike's vice president just 2 years later, in his autobiography. And the story goes as follows. Later that day, Eisenhower spoke at the beautiful Lakeside Amphitheater. It was not a polished speech, says Nixon, but he delivered it without notes, and he had the good sense not to speak too long. The only line that drew significant applause was his comment that he did not see why anyone who refused to sign a loyalty oath should have the right to teach in a state university. After his speech, we went back to caveman camp and sat around the campfire appraising it. And of course, right there, you see one of the functions of the Bohemian Grove. Well, it was a lakeside talk in 1967 that was enormously important to Nixon himself in his bid for the presidency. He says his speech at the Grove was the start of his comeback, and once again, I'm quoting Nixon. If I were to choose the speech that gave me the most pleasure and satisfaction in my political life, wrote Nixon, it would be my lakeside speech at the Bohemian Grove. Because this speech traditionally was off the record, it received no publicity at the time. But in many ways, it marked the first milestone on my road to the presidency. It gave me an unparalleled opportunity to reach some of the most important and influential men, not just from California, but from across the country. Then there's the speeches by ex-presidents, like the speech that Ronald Reagan gave in 1989. Those speeches are more likely to have a lighter touch. For example, Reagan began with a kind of a joke. He said that there are 3 things that he's learned about growing older. He said the first was that you tend to forget. Then he paused, and then he said, I can't remember the other 2. And of course, everyone laughed. The whole speech was about on that particular level. But the next speech that I want to mention in 1993 was anything but light. It was by a former Secretary of Treasury, and it was an all-out attack on George Bush, contrasting his terrible presidency with the wonderful presidency of Ronald Reagan. And George Bush had to sit there and listen to the whole talk. The next day, Bush's former Secretary of State, James Baker, defended Bush, but he spent most of his time attacking the Clinton administration, as did most of the other speakers that year. Well, for the whole 20th century, from Teddy Roosevelt on, every Republican president has been either a member or a guest at the Bohemian Grove. So it's a place of significant politics. But there's been no Democratic president who's been a member or a guest at the Bohemian Grove. There are a few Bohemians who have served in the cabinets of Democratic presidents, and there have been a few members of Democratic administrations that have gone to the Grove to give lakeside talks. But by and large, the members are Republicans. Of those who give money to campaigns, 95% of them give to Republicans, and on average, they give twice as much as the Democratic members give. Oh my goodness, does that mean the Democrats really are the party of liberals and minorities and low-income people? That they really are the party of the common person? Nope, sorry, at least not yet. They're the party of the fringe groups within the power elite. Historically, that means plantation elites in the South, And today, of course, that means big business people and agribusiness people in the South. From states like Georgia, where Jimmy Carter is from, or Arkansas, where Bill Clinton is from, or Texas, where Lyndon Johnson was from. But the party's also supported by the non-Protestant rich in the North, the kinds of people that are excluded by the waspy people that go to the Bohemian Grove. Well, that just about ends our saga of the Bohemian Grove, but I don't want to conclude without giving you that larger picture that I talked about a little bit earlier. I don't want to leave you with the impression that the Bohemian Grove is at the heart of the power elite. Instead, I want to say to you that we can use our study of the Bohemian Grove to reach out to study other social clubs, because these men, these Bohemians, on average, are in 3 or 4 other social clubs. So it's very easy for us then to figure out the nationwide social networks of big business clubs. But we don't stop just there. We also add policy planning groups, organizations where business people join with experts to discuss the issues of the day and to plan what they want to do in reaction to those issues. These are organizations like the Committee for Economic Development and the Conference Board and the Business Council and the Business Roundtable and the Council on Foreign Relations. And what we do is we take all of the interlocking members, we call them interlocking overlappers for short, and we put them into our computer and we mush them all around with very sophisticated statistical techniques that I really don't quite understand myself. And when we're done, we have what's called a centrality score. That is that the more that a group is in the center of the power structure, the higher its score is. The more its score approaches 100, the more central it is. And when we do that study, we find that the Bohemian Club is low only number 11 in our power structure, as you're now going to see on the screen. 3 other clubs were more central. The Lynx Club of New York at number 3, the Pacific Union Club of San Francisco at number 7, and the Chicago Club of Chicago at number 8. But notice what's right up there at the top. Policy discussion groups like the Business Council with a score of 95, and the Committee for Economic Development at 91. Far more central than any other club or group. That's the heart of the American power elite. And those organizations in turn tie to hundreds of major corporations. And it's right here that we can reinforce another role that's played by a place like the Bohemian Grove, with another finding from small group research on social psychology. Because that research shows that socially cohesive groups are the ones in which members are more likely to pay attention to the opinions of other members and more likely to change their opinions to those of the rest of the group. In other words, my key point is that social cohesion is one of the things that makes policy cohesion possible. It's not just enough to say that these people are all business people. They're in different businesses. They live in different parts of the country. They may not trust each other. Social cohesion is one of the things that makes them possible, makes it possible for them to talk about policies in these organizations like the Committee for Economic Development and the Council on Foreign Relations. And that's the emphasis that I want to have for the Bohemian Grove. But hey, if we're going to get down and academic about all this, I can't leave out our really big and complex and juicy quantitative study of our whole corporate network. What if we put in all the corporations, 10 or 12 major universities, 20 major law firms, civic associations, policy groups, foundations that give money for research and so on? What do we get? Well, the answer's been staring at you right behind me. We find that right square in the center with a centrality score of 100 is old IBM, followed by a couple of those policy groups, followed by a couple more big corporations. But you'll notice there's also a university in there. At number 7, you see Yale University. And right there at number 10, or is it number 11, you see the Rockefeller Foundation, one of the organizations that gives money to universities and to policy discussion group. And down a little further, down about number 19, you see another policy organization called the Council on Foreign Relations. So, did you ever doubt me when I said that anything of importance was linked up with the big corporations in the United States? Isn't it right there in the numbers? Isn't this practically an exact science that I'm talking about here? Well, there's only one thing left to do, and that's to connect that big corporate network to government. And after 15 or 20 years of research, hey, that's a piece of cake. And so what you see behind me is a mind-boggling Rube Goldberg diagram that encompasses the whole power structure. And that includes both the political parties, because it's the people in this network who are the fat cats who raise the big money for both political parties. And the ideas and appointees for both political parties come from this network. And if you don't believe me, just compare Nixon appointees with Carter appointees, or compare the Bush cabinet with the Clinton cabinet. The understanding of this diagram starts up there in what for you is the left-hand corner, where you see the corporate rich and the corporations. Then you see them and their money spreading out to foundations to the right, and to think tanks and universities down below. You know, the foundations, that's like the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation. They give money to the think tanks that are right down below them, and to the policy discussion groups over to their right and near the center. Places, remember, like the Committee for Economic Development and the Council on Foreign Relations that I just mentioned. Meanwhile, of course, the university and think tank experts are pumping their ideas into the policy discussion groups and taking part in them, hoping one of the big boys will notice them and take them to Washington as advisors. This network produces PIP. It produces PIP for government. PIP stands for Policy, Ideology, and Plans. PIP is aimed to keep the corporate rich on top. It's the stuff that the White House and Congress chew on and argue about. And as you can see, this PIP now flows down to government in many ways, like through blue ribbon presidential commissions, through testimony to Congress, through articles in the Washington Post, and of course through appointments to government. Every policy we've studied fits this pattern. Now sometimes the gang fights right on into Congress because there are moderate conservatives and ultra-conservatives in this network. And that's why you'd see somebody like the Secretary of Treasury from the past that I mentioned attacking somebody like George Bush, who's only a moderate kinds of conservative. And lo and behold, sometimes the whole gang, the whole power elite, loses to liberals or to labor or to environmentalists. But not very often. Well, there you have it. The Bohemian Grove, just as I warned you at the outset, is not at the dead center of the power structure. It's off to the side just a little bit. It's just a playground for the powerful. It's not a place of power. But it does help generate the social cohesion that makes policy cohesion possible. Well, thanks for joining me on this trip through the power elite in the Bohemian Grove. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've learned a little bit along the way. And I want you to do me a favor. The next time you see an owl, I want you to remember the cremation of care ceremony. I want you to remember the power elite eating, drinking, and being merry at the Bohemian Grove. And then I want you to think about whether the words, the flowery words of the high priest, really mean something like the following. "Oh, great owl of Bohemia, we thank our lucky stars that we are so rich and powerful. We revel in the challenges, honors, and pleasures that our wealth and connections bring to us. We greatly enjoy these opportunities to come to our own exclusive grove to remind ourselves of just how wonderful we are. We are grateful for the traditions and beliefs that keep most people from questioning the policies that so handsomely reward us. We love the theories that claim we are a natural elite who deserve everything we have. We love the theories that claim people who are poor must suffer their fate silently because they are supposedly less talented, or supposedly less able to postpone pleasure, or supposedly they didn't try hard enough. We are the men of Bohemia. We are the power elite at the Bohemian Grove."
Here's the good old beer, drink her down, drink her down. Here's the good old beer, for it makes you feel so queer. Drink her down, drink her down, drink her down, down, down. Rolling home, dead drunk, rolling home, dead drunk, by the light of the silvery moon. Rolling, 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 rolling home, dead drunk. Here's the sparkling ale, 'cause it makes you feel so hale. Here's the good old wine, 'cause it makes you feel so fine. Here's the good vermouth, 'cause it makes you feel uncouth. Here's the